say is it doesn't get bigger, because without free and fair elections, you don't have a country.
As President Trump teasing his primetime speech set for tomorrow night, two administration officials have told MS Now that the speech will focus on voting machine security and alleged foreign efforts to influence U.S. elections. The text of the speech is not final, but Trump is expected to release a declassified intelligence documents on both of those subjects. The officials tell MS Now it's not clear if Trump will present any credible new evidence, specifically regarding claims of interference during the 2020 election. We will once again note that extensive intel reviews under both the Trump and Biden administrations found no basis for claims that the 2020 election was stolen. We do know, though, that 4 years earlier, Russia certainly did meddle in the 2016 elections to Trump's benefit. Joining us now, former U.S. Ambassador to Denmark, Rufus Gifford. He also served as chief of protocol under President Biden. Editor-at-large for Newsweek, CNBC founder Tom Rogers with us. He's also senior advisor of Versant, MS Now's parent company. And we're happy to also be joined by former state attorney for Palm Beach County, Florida, Dave Aronberg. A great group. My thanks to you all. Rufus, we'll start with you. We're going to go to Dave in a minute as a reminder about the lack of evidence and the legal challenges that have already failed about the 2020 election. Let's have you talk about the politics of it. Sure. There are a lot of Republicans who this is the last thing they want President Trump to talk about. This is ancient history. It's 6 years ago. It's not popular with the public. It reminds people of what happened on January 6th and the like. Yet Trump persists to do it anyway.
Oh, absolutely, Jonathan. I mean, I think look, the more that Democrats the more the Republicans, the president, the Republican Party are talking about what happened 6 years ago, an election that, as we have said, has been probably the election that has been counted, recounted, litigated more than any election in the world, in particular in Georgia. The more that we need to be focused, we can be talking about the issues that I think American voters really want to talk about. I can't think of an American voter that's a swing voter in the 2026 election that has any interest in relitigating the Georgia election of 2020. It is a political win for Democrats. There's no doubt that is true, but we also have to seize on it. And I don't think we've been particularly effective as a party in seizing on these opportunities of the Trump administration.
And there's even some speculation that he'll claim that the two senators, Warnock and Ossoff, who won in 2020, that they won so illegitimately and shouldn't be seated, which, of course, there's zero evidence of that. So, Dave Aronberg, let's go to you. As a reminder, please, just how many court cases did the Trump people bring up post November 2020? And remind those watching at home just how many they won.
Oh, yeah, it was about 62. They lost all of them except for one small procedural victory. But from the substance of it, they lost every substantial case they brought, anything related to whether the 2020 election was stolen. And if you want to help Jon Ossoff get elected in a landslide, go after him, call him illegitimate, and say the election was stolen. I mean, that's a gift to the Democrats. This is a nightmare for the GOP. The issue of a stolen 2020 election is a loser for Republicans. You're right. 60-plus judges already rejected the claims, including Bill Barr, the attorney general, and the head of Trump's cybersecurity agency. But this is a pretext to an attempt to challenge the 2026 and 2028 election results and to try to federalize future elections. So Trump is actually looking forward, not backward, and he's going to try to conflate foreign bad actors trying to sow discord, which is true, with the election was stolen, which is not true. And after all, if the 2020 election was really stolen, don't you think we would have seen at least a single criminal charge from this Department of Justice relating to this? This is the same agency that indicted James Comey over seashells, but nothing from DOJ related to election interference. That tells you all you need to know.
No, Dave, you're so right. Yes, it's a little bit about Trump's ego about losing in 2020, but Tom Rogers, it's far more about setting up pretenses for 26 and 28. He's trying to get the Save America Act pushed. Many people feel that would really restrict voting. It seems unlikely. It seems like it won't go anywhere in the Hill. But you've been thinking about ways he can sort of achieve similar objectives.
Absolutely. I think we have a combination of desperation and obsession on Trump's part here to do something to overturn the 2026 elections. Clearly, he's been frustrated by Congress not passing Save America. He's been frustrated by the courts who have shot down his attempts to change process when it comes to the midterms. And the question is, so what does he do? And I think the speech tomorrow night, along with a number of other speeches he's given, is about laying the groundwork for him to take action. He's going to claim that the 2026 midterms were rigged if Democrats in key districts win that would turn Congress into Democratic majorities. He will say the results can't be finalized until it's all investigated because there was foreign interference or illegal immigrants voting. He would then probably order Congress to organize around Republican majorities and say you can't seat members in districts where we're questioning the results. I think what would follow from that is enormous street protest, probably stimulating violence on his part by bringing in troops. And then it could get really scary. There's something that hasn't been focused on at all called PEDS, or Presidential Emergency Action Documents. These are highly classified documents that have been in place since the Eisenhower administration. When you hear Trump saying, I have a lot of powers that people don't even know about, or I have very strong emergency powers, he's probably referring to those. They've never been used. They're in place to be signed in the event of a nuclear attack and civil society totally disintegrates and president has to take some kind of emergency action. I think he's laying the groundwork to be able to put those in effect, arrest and detain people without trial, seize election machines. Obviously, all that would be litigated, but we know the courts move a lot slower than the administration would move in that kind of circumstance. And I think we're headed with all this communist threat talk of bigger threat than World War I, World War II, Pearl Harbor, and 9/11. He's talking about something that he thinks is he's going to be able to turn into a major crisis to take actions like that. We'd be naive not to think so.
Yeah, and we are seeing some Democratic officials starting to sound the alarm on that.